There you go. So we'll
Who
get
was
this
that?
in it.
But the
What's
thing
her
is, I
name?
don't know where it's recording to. It's not giving me an option of
Really? Well,
where.
let's just assume it's going to the cloud. Either that or it's in your.
Oh, yeah. There's the little cloud. Okay.
Uh,
I'm gonna stop it for now. Or should I just pause it?
pause it. Yeah. Hi, everyone. This is our monthly permaculture speaker series. And this month of May, we're going to have Auntie Hazel. And I'm going to let Karen go ahead and give a little bit of an introduction to Hazel, and then maybe Hazel wants to introduce themselves. I did it. And the recording, the interview will be recorded and on our speaker page at northwestpermaculture.org. So feel free to take over, Karen and Hazel.
Great, thank you. Can everybody hear me all right?
Very nice.
Thank you, Julie. It's really nice to be here and to see all these names and faces on Zoom. And I've had the great pleasure of working with Hazel for the past almost 14 years now. And I mean, Hazel's a friend, but also an elder in permaculture and more. We've been working on like, what is social forestry, and what is it to become people of place and to connect with the forests and the land in which we are inhabiting. And Hazel has been that person who has lived this their entire life and has really brought that into our area and made it available to people through classes and now through Hazel's new book, which I'm realizing I don't have a copy here to show you. Oh, great. Thank you. Awesome. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn it right over to Hazel because that's what we're here for. So.
Good morning. Glad to see actual people out there in this ether that we're speaking through. I'm looking out a picture window behind the computer at trees and green, and it's so green this year. But interestingly green, and maybe we can talk about that more. That the way that ecosystems work is through complexity. And as humans, we do complications to try to come into relationship with complexity. And so that's kind of our crutch, is making things up to try to come into relationship. And as we go through these questions, I think a lot of it's going to be about the relationships that social implies when we say social forestry. And personal introduction, I never know where to start, right? I I think Karen's right. I've been doing this all my life, but more than that, I have a string of ancestors through my mother's side of the family that goes way back and has always been doing social forestry in New England and upstate New York. So I have a really special Hicksite Quaker narrative thread that I carry that allows me to be a traditional. So I'm a traditional. I'm not a indigenous First Nations person, but I'm a traditional culture person, and I was raised with this old branch of Quakerism, the working class farming Quakers in the Adirondacks in upstate New York. So lots of stories there, and I'm thanking my ancestors here. I'm doing a little gratitude at the beginning of this talk, because all these council meetings that we should do together in order to be more social and to come into relationship with the whole planet and to the forests on this planet, all those relationships are full of gratitude. And often in many cultures, there's quite a long period of gratitude speaking before we get down to business, as it were. So I'm hoping this whole Zoom is threaded with gratitude and that you catch that about how much fun I'm having, as it were, how happy I am to have all these relationships, very complex relationships. So there's my little homily, as we call it, one of Hazel's homilies to get things rolling. And then I believe we have questions, and we still don't have Chloe. I wonder if someone should text her or something, but I believe we have the questions, so we could start.
Okay. I'm going to, let's see. Go ahead and start the questions, and if Chloe shows up, we'll let her take over. So the first question we have for Hazel is, could you tell us about your background? Where did you grow up and how did you acquire your knowledge?
Ooh.
A bit more.
Good that I already got started on that, huh? So I grew up in the village of South Glens Falls at the base of the Adirondack Mountains, the southeastern corner of the Adirondack Mountains, near Lake George, where the Hudson River comes out of the mountains, where the Hudson River comes out of the Adirondacks. And as it comes out of the Adirondacks, the Hudson River dumps onto a plain, which is the Glens Falls, South Glens Falls, sandy soils sitting on top of limestone. So this is a village where my family has lived for many generations, and it's called the Tri-County area, Warren County, Washington County, and Saratoga County. And those three counties, my both sides of my family have been living in those counties for over 400 years now. We can trace some relatives back that far to the earliest Dutch colony. So the Dutch colonies are a whole different story that I don't think gets taught well in American history. They were their own thing before the end of the English War. So in 1632, I think it was, the English took over the Dutch colonies. And my name, Waarde, which you have to practice, you have to roll that R to say it right. That name, it got changed, it got anglicized to Ward, W-A-R-D. So I'm trying to, with my pen name, I'm trying to honor my ancestors and show these threads. So both sides, both my mom and my dad were great storytellers, and they did a lot of place marking, a lot of teaching about where we were and who we were. And that included lots of picnics. We liked to picnic in graveyards. That was a favorite picnic place. And we would go on walks. And so I had these children's pilgrimages, and I had this wild time in the woods as a child. So from 4 years old on, I was let go in the woods on my own to get scratched and messed up and find things and grovel in mud and whatever. So all that wildness as a child combined with these deep cultural stories, these deep cultural narratives, and relationships with remnant, still persistent First Nations peoples who who would visit the Quaker meeting I was raised in. All this gives me a really kind of special background, which I'm hoping translates into stories that are useful in these modern times. Thus, we now have this book. So there's a kind of a quick overview of what I think I'm bringing to this conversation, and we can go from there. Is that enough? You want more? Oh, yeah, I did go to college. I was discouraged by the high school. They said I should go work in the factories. And my Quaker ancestors all lost their farms under the Rockefeller plan, which shut down small farming and small businesses and moved in corporate control of everything and industrialism. And that whole Tri-County area that I grew up in is now an industrial sacrifice zone. It's a highly toxic place. You can't drink the water. The air is awful. They're trying to clean up that part of the Hudson River. So there's a very sad story here, but it's a sad story which is shared with many, many local peoples all over the planet. They have very much the same narrative of industrialism and extraction that has degraded so much of the planet. So it's a miracle that I'm carrying these stories, that my family kept these stories alive in the face of the difficulties. And I do have many relatives still in that area. They moved a little bit further out into the counties, away from the most toxic hotspots right on the Hudson River. So I have siblings and nephews and cousins galore. Apparently, there was 100 people in my graduating class at South Glens Falls High, and maybe half of those people were cousins of mine. Some of them distant cousins, but it was a fairly inbred Quaker, isolationist, small farming, dairy farming culture that got squashed. And it's a lot to talk about there, but let's talk about social forestry.
What inspired you to write this book, Social Forestry, Tending the Land as People of Place? I think you might have answered that, but is there anything?
Yeah. Well, my snappy answer is popular demand. So we've been teaching this social forestry course for quite a while. In fact, when I first started teaching college in 1971 at Laney College in Oakland, California, the title of the course was Wild Edible Plants and Woods Lore. And it was indeed a proto-permaculture course and covered a lot of bases. And I was able to give lots of different science credits for this course. So I got going at this professionally a long time ago, based on my College of Forestry training and my indigenous traditional stories of place.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have this book, which I joke is quite heavy. When you're done reading it, it'll make a fine doorstop. I might bronze a copy to use as a doorstop. It's like 500 and some pages. So there you are. I have delivered.
Great. Good job. So what does it mean to be a people of place?
Wow. Boy, do we need there's a lot to think about there. In fact, last night, twice a month, I visit my friend Doug, and he shows me videos on TV. Otherwise, I don't watch much. And last night, we stumbled on a Zoom panel, talking about what does it mean to be indigenous. So people of place is pretty close to indigenous. It means, I think indigenous means a people of place. So to be a people of place is to recognize that we as a people are the place. And that's tricky for moderns to understand because we're so peripatetic. We move so easily. We change our identities. We change our clothes. So a people of place is in deep relationship to a landscape. And I use mathematical terminology, chaos math, basins, basins of influence, strange attractors. So when the land itself is basically tells all the peoples, all sentient beings who live on that basin of basins, how to be. We learn from the land. We become the land. We become people of place. And that video I saw last night, the first thing this Navajo woman said was, you look at people of place and they are wearing the place, the clothes they're wearing, the marks they're wearing on their face, the way they hold their hair, the tools they're holding in their hands. This is all place. And so as a people of place, you walk around exhibiting your relationship to the place. And it's through your language and how you move and what dances you do and what you eat and what you wear. And so it's a whole big thing. And it has the potential for resilience, persistence, right livelihood, which is a Quaker phrase. And this is what we need on the planet right now, is reasonable ways to live within the boundaries, within the carrying capacity of a place. And these are two books I often refer to by William Catton. The first one is called Overshoot, and we are in serious overshoot as a human species. We're in what's called an ecospasm. We are a species in ecospasm. We are living beyond the carrying capacity of our surroundings. I'm not going to call it a place right there. And then the second book is Bottleneck. And that's what happens to ecospasms. They enter in the final phase, they enter constriction. They have to go through a narrow passage. And this is I do like to get the science in here and the math in here. When you move through a bottleneck, it's the same thing as going through a phase change. It's going through the chaos barrier. It's going through into the unknown. And there's no way to know what's on the other side. However, the reorganization on the other side of the bottleneck has something to do with things that went into the bottleneck. So I believe our job as becoming people of place is to come into these relationships soberly and hold hope and hold glory and love and move forward. And even though we understand just how dire and how crazy our circumstances are. Okay, how sideways did I just go then? I call that orthogonal, going sideways, going off at an angle. Got more questions?
Yes.
I can go sideways some more.
Well, you'll get to go sideways with every question. I apologize that our Northwest Permaculture Convergence logo comes up whenever I speak. It's because my phone is more reliable than my satellite internet. So apologies for that. But the next question is principles of social forestry.
Well, the book has like 60 of them.
Wow.
Every chapter has a list of principles at the beginning. And I'm going to try to go to the first chapter here. Chapter 1, working together brings good fortune. That's the number one principle here. And that has to do with relationship. And then each of these chapters I've derived the principles from the text. I didn't write the text based on abstract principles. These principles are what are called emergent properties of complexity. So they have these principles that are listed on the principles clipboard are emergent ideas coming out of the process of thinking about social forestry. And I've kind of been talking about the basic principles, which is living within carrying capacity, coming into relationship with all sentient beings, appreciating humbly what we're dealing with, which is complexity, which is beyond our ability as humans to understand, and then coming into cultural processes, because I believe that culture is where wisdom is held, not in individuals. Individuals in modern consumer societies have been over-empowered, I might call it, given permission to misbehave, encouraged to misbehave. And so you have what's called hyper-individualism. In my traditional cultures, and most of the traditional cultures I've dealt with, an individual may think they have a brainstorm or think they have met truth. And usually the first thing that is said is, oh, take it to committee. You need to talk to the elders. And the elders very quickly say, well, nice truth. We've seen it before, and this is what we do with that truth. And here's how you might think about it in relationship to community. So to come into truth is a cultural, social process that we're not used to, that the society in the aspects of modernism are fragmentation and alienation, which is very economically convenient for consumerism. So how do we break out of hyper-individualism, come into wisdom through culture? We need to derive principles. And in Quakerism, we call that advices and queries. In other words, there are advices, which are principles of living, like we had an advice against insurance. Oh, you're going to gamble against God? What are you thinking? And then we have queries, which help us orient ourselves to the advices. So questions get asked. Laws are not laid out. It's advices. It's queries. So that's a cultural process. And I think we all need to learn to do this if we're going to be able to do good forestry work. Come into relationship with the complexity of working with a forest through a great deal of humility and an avoidance of hubris and living within our means. So again, my ancestors, my Quakers ancestors talk about simplicity. They talk about right livelihood, which I mentioned before. So these are principles for humans to follow, to give them tools to come into relationship with things that are actually beyond our ken, K-E-N, our ability to understand as a culture. All right, I kind of stayed on topic that time.
I hope it was still fun. Hey, let's turn my video on my phone. Yeah, that's interesting. I love that you've written principles of social forestry, because the impression that I get is you've lived permaculture from the beginning for decades, and hopefully new things will emerge. So it makes a lot of sense to me that there would be emerging principles from your experience. So 60, that's amazing, 60 principles. The next question is, how will practices of social forestry help us transition?
Well, number one, forest bathing. I wish I could say it in Japanese. Shinrin-ko, something like that. So we want to carry wisdom through the bottleneck, the transition. How do we do that? We do it with art, dance, song, stories, patterns, colors, procedures, cultural procedures, coming together, working in council. And these are the tools of actually deciding what work needs to be done and how to get it done with perfect timing. And so using the principles of social forestry to get through transition, it's like these are hopefully the magic pills that we're delivering, this fabric that we're weaving, to cheer us up and to help us continue to feel connected and to not lose faith. Because actually the planet is probably going to do fine once it comes into a new relationship with the humans. I could really get off on that, what I just said. Let me try. Every time there's been a mass extinction on this planet, the planet has come back with greater biodiversity than it had before the mass extinction. So here we are in the 6th mass extinction that we know of from geological records. And so over millions or 100 million years, this planet's going to come back even more complex than it is now. I'm pretty sure of that. That's a faith I hold from knowledge, from learning, from looking, from reading the rocks, and from these long stories that come down. Because the human experience has gone on for a couple of 3 million years now. And so we carry that too, and that might help us get through this transition. So that's a hard question to answer. I tried.
Hazel, could I add something to that?
Yeah, please.
I think on a very practical level, earth skills.
Yeah.
So there's all these gatherings where you can go and spend a week and experience what it's like to be in that joy and to learn very tangible skills like, how to tan hides, how to make cordage, to getting us back to like these simple skills, or even, learning how to weave or make your own clothing, or, so, one of the things that Bill Mollison talks about is how do we become producers and not consumers, and getting away from just, consumption to making things with their hands again. And so gatherings like Echoes in Time and Rabbit Stick and Winter Count and the natural building workshops. I mean, just gathering together with people doing these projects and working together, I think are skills that we need to really nurture.
Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope you saw my message about the screenshots that you want to share. And Hazel, if you know what screenshots Karen has, if anything matches what we're talking about.
Yeah, I gotta think of that.
Yeah. Let's see. So should we move to the next question?
Yeah.
This this is a statement. It could be very cool to have you, Hazel, read an excerpt from the orchestra assemblies, page 90 to 91.
Yeah, so this came out of one of the talks that I gave years ago about the nature of the white oak tree. So all over the Northern Hemisphere, the white oak is known by cultures to be special. And ecologically, that's called implications. So the white oak tree has more, as far as we know, ecological relationships than most other trees. And thus there's all these stories. So I told this story about the cohorts, and this is the orchestra assembles. I'll read the first section of this poem. It goes on. The cohorts of acorn women that dwell in the ground, let us praise them. The bull snake, the racer, the garter, the viper, the alligator lizard, the bluebelly and the skink, the ground squirrel, mole, gopher, and mice, mushroom mycorrhiza, root hairs and bacteria, morel, bluet, bolete, amanita, brodea, fritillary, sago lily, lomatium, green thistle, oshala, yampa, grasses, mustards, mints, capers, monardella, clarkia, collinsia, yerba buena, the special worms, all pink and blue, all dwell together. Some eat others, others are eaten. And right now this year, the wildflower show is spectacular. It's just amazing, especially in the savannas where we have restored by clearing out underbrush and reintroducing cool burning. Beautiful. And because of the long extended winter, a whole bunch of the flowers that I just read about are blooming all at once. So it's quite a special spring. And as an aside, one of the things to understand about place is the difference between different water tables. So right now in Southern Oregon, the soil sponge, the soil water capacity is very high, but the rock storage, the deeper water tables are continuing to fail because of a lack of traditional flooding, a type of flooding that recharges the deeper water tables has not been happening. Instead, we've got a new rainfall pattern that is holding the ecosystem fine because of the soil sponge water capacity. But civilization's having a hard time because it likes to drill wells deep, get as much water as they can. So much to learn that really changes how we do things. And the ecosystems are going through giant changes, and they have many times gone through giant changes. And we as humans kind of are, we have a type of inertia that's very selfish. We want things to stay the same, which humans think that's what they like. But a culture can learn to celebrate all these complex relationships and their changes. We can dance those changes. So there we go. A little view into the implications of complexity.
I was very curious about what you said in the beginning, that maybe we could talk about why the greens are so different. And I did notice that flowers that usually bloom at different times are blooming at the same time. Could you talk to us a little bit more about why the greens are so amazing and somehow different this year?
The greens, all the different shades of green, all the different green plants. Yeah. Sometimes the term delinking is used when a climate change causes a flower to bloom when the pollinators that usually deal with that flower are not up from hibernation yet. So we just had this interesting winter, which I, having been in the Siskiyous for 50 years, more than 50 years now, this winter is more similar to what we had in the 70s before this big drought started in 78. That's when things really started to change. Now we're in another big change. So we're watching these small year-to-year changes without having enough memory of these bigger changes, these really big changes. And luckily we have tree ring records and we have pollen cores. And so we can look at some clues about big changes that have taken place and how ecosystems have adjusted to that. So the reason so many wildflowers are all blooming at once is because this winter stayed cool for so long that it suppressed blooms and suppressed the pollinators from coming out, which turned out to be a good thing. So when everything bloomed at once about 2 weeks ago, all the pollinators showed up, all these different species. So complexity is beyond our ken, but we should be noticing what's going on. And noticing is a cultural skill because it means we have stories that we're reminded of because of things we're seeing that are happening on the ground. And that triggers our cultural memory and we go, oh, this is that sort of time. And we can, by seeing these things as messages, we can come into relationship with change by noting, by noticing, by holding on to the story. And that requires actually being embedded in nature, back to that forest bathing point I made earlier. We don't have many people living out on the land as we used to. We've urbanized and we've industrialized extraction on the larger landscape. So we're lacking people on the land. This is a big part of social forestry. Take the machines out of the forest, put the humans back in.
So good. We do have a question, and I do have one more question, but I think I would like to open it up to Q&A, and I know some people need to leave at the top of the hour. Is that okay if we open it up to Q&A now? Okay, let other people ask. We do have a question from Lori. She says she'd love to hear your thoughts on intentional planting of trees in communities, general advice and guidelines. So much long.
Planting trees in communities of trees or planting trees in communities of humans. So those are two different things.
The same question. Communities of humans. Oh, I was thinking the other. Yeah, she said communities of humans. Places that lack trees.
Yeah, good. Well, so forests do migrate. It looks like tree species are migrating at different rates from each other, but the whole complex forest migrates during times of change of climate. What I'm doing at Wolf Gulch is I'm bringing in edible ethnobotanical trees from south of me to help the forest move north and to move into higher elevation. So wherever you have a human community, you can think about what's coming and you can get ahead of it. In early permaculture, we used to say, plant them all, let mama sort them out. And that was called broad scale diversity. But I think we can be a little smarter than that. I'm planting gray pines, which have big cones and wonderful nuts, and I'm planting California buckeye, which is a highly toxic nut that can be detoxified, but you have to be careful. So I'm hoping to move in currants next, and maybe toyon berries. So thanks to all my experience in Northern California and having been in Southern Oregon for a long time, I have some idea of what to bring further north that might be able to support us and that gives us a sense of participating in change instead of being buffaloed. And that's probably the wrong metaphor, by change.
Yeah, I've been aware of a woman, I forget her name, and several people who are actually getting ahead with the migration of the redwoods coming north. And of course, getting all the way up here in, Northern Oregon and Washington to get oaks going up here too. It makes a lot of sense. Are there any, you can comment to that if you want. Are there any more questions?
I will comment one more on that. Nancy Turner, Keeping It Living, British Columbia ethnobotany. I believe she's the one who tells this great story about how the early botanists in British Columbia, who were all guys, were looking at these isolated oak woodlands on southwest facing slopes in British Columbia. And they were going, oh, these must be remnants from some interglacial period. No, these are entire ecosystems which were moved north by humans. And we just don't understand how sophisticated the horticulture of indigenous peoples all over the planet has been during times of climate change. There's been some very, very remarkable things done, which are hard to prove, right? You don't have the kind of hard, reductive, linear scientific proof. Therefore, it gets waved off. Oh, that couldn't possibly have happened because humans seem so stupid now. How could they have ever been smarter in the past? I've said that. Oh, okay.
And Paul has his hand raised. Paul's ready to talk to us.
Oh, thank you. Nice to meet you, Hazel. I don't think we've ever met. So I was wondering if you could reflect a little bit on what you imagine or have seen or experienced in the relationship between forest camps and their settlements, and sort of the interaction between human settlements and forest camps, and what you see present or missing, or how that could evolve or develop, or edges of development that you see now.
Good question. So there's something called hoop culture, which comes out of Ursula Le Guin's parents studying Ishi. So the book, I think it's Ishi, the Last Man or something, talks about there being a winter camp, a kind of permanent village, and then forestry camps or seasonal camps that move up with the snowpack retreat, move to different elevations during the spring and the summer, and then come back down to winter camp in the fall. And all those different tasks in those different forestry camps are special to that elevation and that ecosystem. So I'm trying to think this out in a transition phase. And the first thing I'm thinking is that a lot of organic farms and a lot of villages with their rural city interface could use some seasonal forestry camps, because that interface is the most hammered, the most beat up, the most trashed, overroaded, overlogged areas. So this requires a cultural shift. It takes people who consider themselves more permanent or village people coming into relationship with nomadic peoples. And that's something that Morris Berman talked about quite a bit in his book, Wandering God. There's always been a conflict between, Ishi in two worlds. Here it is. There is a narrative. Now, I'm not going to, Karen keeps trying to stop me from exaggerating, but I'm Dutch from New York, so sorry. There is a narrative of difficulty between grazing people and farming people. And that, I think, is parallel to what we're looking at now between city cultures, which are mechanical, I'll call them, and ecosystem function maintenance. So we have degraded ecosystem function so badly, but we're not willing to put the money into something that doesn't show immediate profit. So this is really big. We're talking about relocalization, decentralization, and degrowth. So there's so many things involved in this that moderns want to talk about, and I want to talk about actual work on the landscape. So I'm on the side of these forestry camps coming into relationship with markets, I'll call them. Instead of villages, let's call them marketplaces. And in the book there are, and we didn't get these posters ready for that. In the book, there is a transition poster about the relationship between forestry camps, schools, farms, and markets are in the middle. And I think we do have the Venn diagram for adaptation ready to put up. Karen could put that up and we could have a quick look at that. And that sort of answers, but this is a very important question you're asking, and I've been dealing with it for a long time. Local ranger districts, both BLM and Forest Service, actually have roadside maintenance problems, which is an opening for us because roadsides are one of the last old English law commons. So we can start our forestry camp work on roadside maintenance and come into relationship with bureaucracies, but those bureaucracies themselves need to come into relationship with markets, with local markets, villages, as you asked. So here you see this Venn diagram with forest care in the middle, and there's conservation and regeneration aspects, and they're kind of fine print, but you can see what they are around the edge. Then there's horticulture, which is a village activity, right? It's about intensive, thank you. Horticulture is about bringing the wild into the village for intensive productivity. And that's kind of some permaculture ideas in that, and I can go off on permaculture, but not right away. And then you see social forestry over here in the bottom left corner. So I think we can use those big concepts to look at overlap. So look at where those circles overlap. Between horticulture and social forestry, you have tree crops and food forests. Those food forests and those tree crops are in that interface between the villages and the forestry camps. Then you look at the overlap between social forestry and conservation, and there you see refugia, holding complex ecosystems safely through times of change. That's what refugia means. And restoration camps, which by that I mean ecosystem function maintenance. And then when you go over and you look at the overlap between horticulture and conservation, you see seed banks and nurseries. And I would add to that, look right up above that, respect and heritage, by which I mean cultural values, stories, knowledge. So there's a little map that relates to what you asked about, but there is another diagram that is specific to the relationship between villages, farms, and forestry camps. And to repeat, I think a lot of organic farms have untended woodlots that could use a cottager, and perhaps that cottager could sponsor seasonal workers who are on hoop, so to speak, who spend one season at this farm, and depending on where the farm is, doing seasonally specific work. Okay, I really went off, but you asked a really good question. Thanks, thanks for putting that up.
Yeah, thank you. We have some more questions in the chat.
Can we go back to Galley?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Let's see. Go back to gallery. Sure. I thought we could.
Yeah.
Give me a
Okay,
second.
questions.
The question was favorite woodland, edible or medicinal from Oregon to help move north to Washington.
Great.
Shaylee.
Well, you already have Douglas fir. Thank you. Good question. You already have Douglas fir. Some of the oaks, manzanitas, vacciniums. We have a lot of huckleberries down here. Some of the pines, we have this Jeffrey pine down here, which has an edible nut, which I've seen listed in the Nut Growers of Northern Nut Growers book. So look for these nuts, look for these tree crops that can be moved north. I wish you guys up there could work with the native Oregon apple, the Oregon crab apple, which is being cross-pollinated by introduced apples from Europe. So there's other work we can do that has to do with grafting, not just seed, not just moving seed and nursery stock. What's really special down here? Yerba Santa, and the nitrogen fixers. So here in Northern California and the Oregon coast, we have such geologically unstable ground that we have a wider variety of nitrogen fixers than a great deal of the rest of the planet. And I really like the Ceanothus integramus, Ceanothus cuneatus. These are red root medicinals, and they support immune systems during stress. And they're also slightly nitrogen fixing, and they taste like wintergreen. So I've been making bark and twig beers using wild yeasts and seasonal collection of these really tasty nitrogen fixing shrubs. Okay, so there's a few. Get us going thinking about this. But there's lists to look at to think about what we can do. And there used to be a plant species index that Sherry Litwin put together out of Seattle. She now has a new name. And we used to hand that out at the courses, at the design courses. I do have a clarification to make about the difference between permaculture and social forestry, but maybe you have another question first.
No, go ahead.
This is coming up for me quite a bit. Permaculture is actually an emergency educational system put together under duress by David and Bill. And it's a design methodology, and it was built with some incorrect assumptions. And when it arrived in America, it got gamed. It got made into a franchise, and design became professionalized. Well, professionalization is actually pretty new since the Second World War. As an economic machine, professionalization, and permaculture kind of got swept up into this. So my bad auntie attitude is that permaculture is a tool of social forestry. Social forestry has been around a lot longer than permaculture, and I want to shrink permaculture. I want to shrink it into what it's really good for, because it kind of was stated as this broad, universal, holistic approach to everything, and it's not. It's an educational boot camp where you learn basic skills that any organic farmer who's been 6 generations in place is totally on top of. And Uncle Bill was pretty clear that he borrowed all this information that he uses as illustrations. But we have gotten stuck on design. And this is a big problem, because the land teaches us how to behave. We don't design how to behave. That's very human-centered, ego-centered, individualistic, professional. It's very difficult. It's a basket we've gotten that some permaculture people have gotten trapped in. And of course, I'm one of the people who built the permaculture movement. I trained all these people. And now I'm telling you, great, nice tool, let's shrink it. And so practically an example of that would be, okay, we've got a garden design. Don't go through the whole permaculture thing. Go out in the garden, make a little sketch, real quick, try it out. If it doesn't work, change it. So that's a process of adaptation that uses some of the skills that permaculture teaches people about observation and mapping and lists, but it doesn't focus on that. Very few fancy permaculture designs have actually been implemented and then managed and maintained. I think Alan Savory, thank you, Alan Savory, for your work, has said it well, which is cultures have learned to talk holistically, but they have not learned to manage holistically. Managing holistically, I think he means, is coming into relationship with place in a way where place is dictating what you do. And we need to have our antennae out and kind of learn from that, and learn from a whole bunch of other sources and put that together. And I'm increasingly not seeing that as design. And if you go back into the roots of the word design, it's this German philosophy, and it's very egg-headed. It's really masculine, hierarchy, patriarchy. There's problems with this, and I've seen it kind of play out. So let's keep the permaculture movement going, but let's be more specific. Let's be more critical. Let's look at its whole premise. Let's be truthful about its story. There's a lot of story here. And let's think about how to use permaculture as a tool and to know how it works best and where it deludes us, where it goes sideways on us. We need to be careful with this. This is a gift. It was brought forward, permaculture was brought forward as an emergency, revolutionary activity, and it's loaded with problems because of this. What we need to do is stay in one place. Make that, there's a part in the book that calls How to Become People of Place. And it's a work. It's a big work. And we've been through the first hour already almost here, but okay. I hope that was useful. Sometimes I try to talk about this and I get a lot of pushback, but I do.
Oh yeah, we're very much, we carry this name permaculture, and we're very much aware of I would actually like to re-listen to what you said about shrinking permaculture, because there's just so much. I don't know, Shaylee could probably speak to this more. There's a lot of problems with permaculture, and we can practice permaculture without ever using the word. For sure, we can use the best of it, of the tool. Anyway, I'm not sure that was very useful. There was another question. I see Terry's coming on the screen. Before I read this question, Terry, do you have a question? Do you have a question or comment?
Oh, I really appreciate that critique, Hazel. I mean, the idea of writing it all out on paper and then thinking that you can just put that onto the ground has always felt strange to me. And so I really appreciate the listening to the land about what happens where. And yeah, if you get out there and do it, it's ever changing, and you can't fit your paper that you developed at the end of your permaculture design course very well onto the land. So thank you.
You had another question there?
I'm going to jump in a second.
Oh, yeah,
Hazel,
go ahead.
Organic is online one.
I have the social forestry transition image if needed, just saying.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and put it up so the people who are still here can at least have a peek of it, and then they can go to the book and look at it again. But this image, okay, this is one of them. Oh yeah, this is the one. This actually comes out of work that I did with the Wilderness Charter School out of the Ashland Public High School, where we did do roadside maintenance up in the watershed, and you can see the different things we did in field camp, which is a forestry camp, and look where market is. So farms, schools, there's reskilling down at the bottom next to skills. They come together in market, and that's something we need to reinvent. This is not consumerist market. This is not profit market. This is more barter market, as it were. And you can see the relationship lines. So this is a basic bubble diagram. You have the bubbles, which contain subjects, and then you have the lines which show relationships. So you can see that schools and field camps, and this is a transition poster, right? It's not the ultimate design, excuse me. So consumer demand, certification, vernacular values, barter, local currencies, a whole bunch of these things are transition things, but they help us start to value the relationship between these different entities which exist sort of now. And you can see what I did. I put forestry camp at the top. Boom. Okay, that was good. Thank you. Thank you, Karen, for finding these things. And I need to take a very short break. So I'll be right back.
Okay.
And Karen can answer some questions. And Karen, you had one more poster you could put up to entertain the folks, which is that social then. I'll be right back.
Good. And then Paul, you raised your hand again.
Oh yeah, I was trying to wait an appropriate amount of time.
You really have been holding this. That's great. And yeah, we'll Karen, you go ahead and screen share that, and you can talk to us about it. You gotta unmute though if you're gonna talk to us. Sacred place. Social.
There you go.
So yeah, this is the social order Venn diagram, and how, I guess, how we organize ourselves and what cultures have. So we have etiquette, like how do we behave? Taboos are what's, you know, in our culture, we don't do this, right? And there's usually reasons why, that have to do with health and safety and I'll let Hazel talk about this more, but it's something just to kind of
I'm back.
meditate on a bit.
Oh, great. That was fast. Thank you, Karen. And take it away.
Yeah.
This kind of covers some of the stuff we've been talking about, with the addition of understanding etiquette and taboos. So modernism has degraded traditional human cultures. This kind of is a game board that we can have, that we can tell stories on. And again, you see those special places where the overlaps are. So taboos and etiquette have to do with our social relationship to the commons, and sacred place and social order are held together through a council process and through celebration. So you can kind of, even though it looks really simple, there's a lot going on in this diagram that kind of shows how we reorient ourselves. Etiquette is how to do things right, and taboos are what we should not be doing for ecological reasons. And early Christian missionaries, I've been studying the Haida. I highly recommend Christy Harris's books, Mouse Woman and Friends. The Haida were forced by the missionaries to destroy their totem poles, but their totem poles were actually ecological books of relationships between humans and magical entities on the landscape. And the Christians saw them as graven images, as things that were being worshipped. But this was not the case at all. It was completely wrong. And so, very, very sad. Recently, another branch of Quakers have apologized for what they did up there in the Northwest, up in British Columbia, to the tribe that was north of the Haida. So anyways, I went off on that. Okay, and I think when I left, there was another question that had come up, so we may have time for one more. Paul had another one, or?
I've already asked one, so if someone else has something burning.
All right. Anybody else have a question? All right.
Go ahead, Paul.
Okay. So I'm loving this very much. And I was thinking about the market and the functions of markets, and I've thought a lot about that, being a bureaucrat. And I'm wondering if if you'd reflect a little bit on the role of guest and host relationships as an alternative to short-term transactions or longer-term transactions that have to do with guest and host relationships and how they fit into these patterns. And it was just, I'm now seeing in your diagram, I'm seeing pieces of that too, which came up after the question occurred to me. But I'm curious about synthesizing etiquette, because that's what, if we lack etiquette, where does it come from? Do we make it up? Do we borrow it? Right? So the genesis of etiquette within a community, especially a dispersed or a moving community. Any thoughts on that sort of process? That's been an area where I'm really focused right now.
Great question. So we are the guests of place. Place is the host. And so if you think of place at different scales, you have a number of different host-guest relationships at those scales. So I'm going abstract because you asked an abstract question. And then you have itinerant people. So you're kind of sneaking into my discussion of guilds, of social relationships. Some of them are mobile, some of them are more place-based, are more very locally place-based. And that guest-host relationship can be, I think moderated might be the right term, or facilitated through traditions, through etiquettes. Because, oh, you have someone who's come from a different drainage basin. Well, probably the first person to talk to that guest, that traveler, is a ranger guild person. And the ranger guild do a lot of different things because they cover more ground. So the ranger guild does a reception at the pass, if you wish, moving into the next basin. The guest comes in, they come to council. There's a exchanging of stories so that we realize what our relationship is to this guest. So, I mean, I'm just throwing things out here, but this all kind of fits together. And that's, I try to illustrate that in the story at the end of the book, chapter 16. And this is a very interesting process for me because this is a big book and very few people have actually read it yet. So this conversation is going to evolve as people read more of this book and start asking smarter questions or more interesting questions for me. So I just played with it a little bit. Do you want to focus in a little bit more on what you're asking?
I think the one place would be in is the construction of etiquette the same as in the creation of a garden? Plant it, see how it works, adapt, or are there other pathways?
Yes, so the Quakers, my own cultural experience is that etiquette grows out of real life experiences and challenges, actually. And so the Quakers were up against the Puritans. Let's start there, okay, right there in the Plymouth colony, 1620 or whatever. So the Quakers had to reach clearness. So there was a clearness process. And out of that clearness process, which is usually a committee, it goes to meeting for business. And then it becomes a minute, which is an initial statement of etiquette. We want to do things this way because we've thought about it very carefully, and we think this is with spirit and with place. So then that's still just one part of the process. Then that etiquette suggestion goes to other meetings, neighboring drainages. And those neighboring drainages come together in quarterly meeting, half-yearly meeting, yearly meeting, 5-yearly meeting. Eventually, this etiquette evolves because so much clearness process has taken place through in so many different, slightly different places, adjacent drainage basins. I mean, I really do like this chaos math, strange attractors, basins. You know, there's a lot of interesting language there that can be used in ecology. And then I'm taking this etiquette and taboos and I'm like resurrecting them, because the Christians went, bang, get rid of those things. And I'm going, no, this is a cultural process of becoming people of place. We're coming into relationship with actual trouble. And we're trying to figure out, how do we navigate this? And can we come up with any principles? And when those principles gather stories, those stories illustrate the principles in such complicated, colorful ways. And then there's feedback through the story changing over time, and through counsel, and through actually doing the dancing. Like, I mean, I'm really intrigued with Joanna Macy and John Seed and their Council of All Beings. How do we bring in all sentient beings into council in order to discover etiquette and taboos? Whoa, that means some humans have to be like channels. They have to do channeling from entities that are non-human. And then we have to like go through a clearness process to see if we're being idiots or not, or if this actually makes any sense. This takes time. And a lot of people nowadays, a lot of comments nowadays are saying technological change fast, social change slow. Ecological change nowadays fast. Adaptation slow. So I like to talk, again, back to math, about inertia and momentum. So there's institutional inertia, where institutions have not got the agility or the resilience to adapt to real-time changes. That takes a smaller group. And so then I'm going to go sideways again and talk about Dunbar's numbers and scale. So that's an anthropological idea. How do we do this at the proper scale in order to get good etiquette? And then how do we share that between these clumps of scale? This is things we can talk about. We actually have the language, but we haven't been bringing together these languages from different disciplines to have this general conversation. We've gotten channeled. I mean, I have some academic background, and departments not talking to each other. What? Universities not having, I sat in the provost's office at Southern Oregon University, and I suggested this university should deal with place. I mean, you've got all these laboratories, you've got these experts. Are you talking to each other? No. Are the curriculums integrated? No. So what are we doing? You know, we're following some corporate model of channeling. And this is what in 1968, the French Revolution was about, channeling. So how do we get out of these channels into a broader understanding of multidimensional ideas like relationship, etiquette, taboos? How do we do this? We do it through drainage basin councils. I see them as shadow governments. And I like the process of salon in order to open the conversation far enough so that everyone feels like they're participating in the ways that they can participate. So there you go. I
So
went
fun.
off.
Love the sideways. Patricia, go.
What's the process of SLOD? What is that? Sorry, Patricia, I don't know that word.
What?
Was it a question in a chat box?
Yeah, sorry for interrupting. No, you said something about the process of SLOD. Is that like did I mishear you? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I thought-
Process is flawed, I think.
Oh,
Oh,
yes.
the process
I may
is
have
flawed.
said,
Okay,
yeah.
all right, sorry, I didn't hear that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
I don't have my hearing aids in either.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, we have process problems.
hey,
Um,
Hazel, as someone with ADHD and an elderly mind, you have just really turned loose a whole passel of squirrels, and my poor little brain is just going in. I mean, I'm sitting here going, Paul, I need to talk to you more. You're just up the pike, and Hazel, I want to come down and visit you. And when you mentioned the thing about Dunbar's number, that like we get too big. My problem's the other end of it. It's too small. Because I'm like isolated, out here east of Tenino, on a place I bought the day they went into lockdown in 2020, and trying to build community, and then seeing it isn't the right place, and how do I get to the right place, and because I can't get enough people here, and there's not enough room for all those trees. So my brain is just like going, and I have the book, so I will work through it. But I've been sitting here wishing that you had this as a book on tape, because my eyes don't support reading for long enough to get through this in less than the next 100 days. So it's like, somebody put it on tape, because I can listen to those. But I wanted to thank you for this, because it's giving me all kinds of hooks. I mean, I envision these camps. Can you imagine if you took some of the kids from our schools and put them on these forestry camps during the summer? And I'm thinking the old CCC camps, to do those again, what a difference it could make. And then the thing about the local community and such, I have a fairly new tenant living out here with me, and he has a cat, and the cat has just recently been let outside, right? And he loves his cat, but he doesn't understand that the cat is the intruder. Cat is the new person in this whole existing landscape. And how do we fit in as the newcomer? It wants to chase the alligator lizards, and I keep telling him it can't have the alligator lizards. They're here first. And I feel like, we really are the cats that, drop into an existing, place and just tear it up. I mean, it's what humans have done so much, of late. But I'm really going to enjoy this book, and thank you. And sorry for all the squirrels.
Well, let me wrap up with a couple of reports here. So two of my colleagues, Megan and Miku, are now involved in building networks of resilience hubs. And resilience hubs are coming up quite a bit. So Megan's working with A Greater Applegate, you can look that up, and in the Applegate Valley, 110 neighborhoods. And Miko's working in the city of Honolulu with Indigenous people and councils in different neighborhoods. And this is quite an ambitious work, to have people talk to each other in councils and then network the neighborhood councils together and come up with working groups, what we would call clearness committees in Quakers. And so I'm totally excited that people I've worked with are on the ground, very ambitious right now, trying to build these transition structures, these transition bureaucracies. And interestingly, they're getting support from the USDA and from, a lot of governments are realizing, oh, we need to invest in whole new patterns of process. And then back to what you said, Patricia, quorums. The Quakers don't think you can make any decisions with less than 6 people. You just can't do it. And 13, familiar number, is nearly perfect for council. 23, if it's dialed in and everyone is practiced, is killer. 23 people in council, really good, but you've got to be skilled. Got to have good elders. You've got to have things really rolling. Once you go over 30, you need to break up. That council's not going to work. So that's a different scale than the Dunbar scale, but it's related. And that comes from very specific Quaker practice, right? I mean, it comes from our experience that no, you're not going to reach clearness, unanimous consent, as we also called it, unless you're working at the right scale and everyone in council is already a person of place. They are members. Council doesn't work when you have drop-ins unless they are facilitated. This is the guest and host question again. How does a guest come into council? They come in as an observer and they have a sponsor. So sponsorship, guests, place, relationship. These are languages. These are conceptual languages. And I'm just now reading Temple Grandin, thinking in images. And she makes that point that we're not thinking wide enough. We don't have the languages to even talk about what our options are. So anyways, this whole Zoom is one of the more sophisticated ones I've done so far. I'm wondering what happens when we get it more together. And that takes a membership process. That takes a guest, host, place, relationship, knowledge. And I want to bless us all with our ancestors. I want us all to find the coolest ancestors we have and to make up a story, a narrative that goes from way back, from when all of us had ancestors living in place, in relationship with place. We were all deracinated, pulled up by the roots, sent out as armies of empire. And now what are we going to do? We need this narrative. We're not the problem. We didn't make these mistakes as humans or as cultural entities. These are systems processes. And we as humans need to come into knowledge of systems thinking. And this is part of what Temple Grandin is trying to get across as a neurodiverse person offering gifts that are not appreciated. But here we are, folks. We just had a neurodiverse conversation. Thank you very much.
We did.
Now I need to take care of errands and go shopping and things. Okay, so
go back to the garden and look at all the green.
Yeah, the green.
Thank you, everybody. We went a little longer than I intended. I'm almost wishing we could sort of have a part 2 at some point with you, Hazel. It seems like this conversation needs to continue. Would you be open to that?
Well, the promotional work of this book is going to go on for a few more months.
Yeah.
And I'm swamped.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about like maybe next year or
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that.
when-
Right.
in the slower seasons. Yeah, this is long term, this is long term. We're going to be doing this for a while.
Start,
So
start with salon, where you are, become people of place, call that a resilience hub, come into relationship with other resilience hubs. Then we'll have a conference. We'll have delegates from our salons and our resilience hubs, and we'll come into some kind of clarity about etiquette.
wow. Yeah, it's amazing. Well, I was going to use one of your words just then, but it's like a new language. Resilience hubs. Yes. Thank you, all my resilience hubs in all these squares here. And we'll
Time for lunch.
time for lunch. Yeah, I did want to say before we go that I am just so loving just sitting in my garden or moving in my garden, observing in my garden, breathing in my garden. And the feeling that I'm getting right now with you, Hazel, is that I'm in my garden. And I really haven't spent that much time with my face in a screen. It's interesting that I'm getting the same feeling from you. Amazing. Thanks everybody for your questions. Paul, Karen, Patricia, Terry, Gary, thanks for showing up on the screen, and everybody else here. Can't mention all the names. Thanks for hanging in here. We'll get this recording up as soon as I can get myself back in the screen and away from the garden. And thank you, Hazel, so much.
Yeah, thank you, Julie, for hosting this, and really wonderful to see everybody here. So feeling lots of gratitude.
Lots of gratitude. Gratitude.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye for now.
Thank you.
God bless you. Oh, I forgot my phone's still on. Hi, Hazel. Am I still talking? I am.
Stop
I
recording.
love you.